Hello, so today I'm going to try to show you how I put two pieces together to make a taller piece, because I can't really throw a tall piece by itself. I'm not really good at that, so the only way I can get really tall pieces is to throw two pieces and then put them together one on top of the other. So I have thrown two pieces. This one in front of me here is the bottom section of the vase, and then I have another piece that's approximately the same size this way, and it's exactly the same size around. So now I'm going to take that piece, I'm going to flip it upside down on top of this one, seal them together with my scoring and slipping, and with any luck this is going to come together nicely. So let's see what happens. So I have my scoring tool. I don't know if you can see that. So I'm going to score along the top edge where I'm going to connect them. So I'm also extremely impatient, so I threw both of these pieces today and I dried them up with a heat gun because I didn't want to wait till tomorrow. So that's that. So I'm going to lean over this way just so I can score the edge of my other piece, and then I'll apply some slip. Sorry, you're off camera here. Whoops. Okay. So now I have some slip made up here, which slip is just really wet, watery clay. This is actually wetter than I usually have it. It's not usually quite this watery, but that's okay. So I'm going to get a good amount of slip on here because I want to make sure these pieces stick together nicely. And I'm not really concerned about like having too much slip and it kind of squishing out in between the sections, because that's easy to clean up on this type of project. So that's all scored and slipped. Now here's my other piece. So I'm going to turn this upside down, hopefully kind of fit these together nicely. So I do always tend to have a little bit of a gap in between the two sections, so I'm going to take some chunks of clay and I'm just going to fill that in. So hang on a second, I'll be right back. So I got just a clump of clay here, and I'm going to roll kind of some tiny coils, because that will fit more nicely into there. Kind of a nice little working tabletop up here. So a little coil like this, and I'm just going to start kind of squishing it into that seam area. That will make my seam nice and strong, and it will help kind of blend the two pieces together. This whole time I hope you're all crossing your fingers for me that this actually works out. I have done a couple pieces before, so I can show you those when we're done here. Okay, so again, another coil. And I'm just going to continue to work all the way around the pot. So when I'm throwing the two different sections, I do try to pay attention to their shape, because I want a nice shape in the end. So like looking at it right now on the camera, I'm not super jazzed about what I'm seeing, but in the end I can kind of alter and trim the shape of it to make it a little bit more what I'm looking for. So I really just want a nicely shaped tall vase. Just got super quiet in here because the furnace just turned off. Thank God. You know, it is April, so I shouldn't have to be running so much heat. But it's April in Western New York, so you never know what you're gonna get. So this should be my last coil here. I want to make sure they're basically the same size coils, just so I don't have like a thick spot and a thin spot on the seam. So snip that off. So I'm just going to try to seal these together a little bit. Not worried about being perfectly blended right now because I can work on that a little bit later. So just kind of a rough blending at this point. It's really quiet in here because I'm used to working with music. Like I always have to have music on to work to. But I had to shut that off while I'm recording this. So now it just seems oddly quiet. So as soon as I'm done here, I'm going to cut this top bat off. And you should be able to kind of see a little bit better how things are going to turn out. So I can already see that I'm going to be trimming away like some of this in here. I'm not crazy about that shape. Okay, just jam my fingernail into it, which I do like almost every day. All right, so now I have my wire cutoff tool, and I'm going to slip this under here. So I'm trying to hold it tight to the bat while I work it through. Here we go. Okay, so there's my basic vase. There is a hole in the top here, so I can now kind of spin my wheel and kind of start to shape this up a little bit. It's not super soft clay, so like I said, I was drying it out with a heat gun. So I tried to avoid really drying this section because I want to really work on this section still to shape it and make it taller. So for right now, I'm going to start working on this lower section here. So I have a couple of ribs. This is super dirty. So I'm going to use this rib. This is just a really soft, flexible rubber rib. So I'm just going to start to try to really blend these sections together. This is not the final tool I'm going to use because I will need something a little bit more sturdy than this very flexible rib. But that's starting to come together a little bit. Let's actually go to, I really should have cleaned these. Let's actually go to this wooden rib here. So this is kind of a nice one because there isn't really any give to this rib. So it's getting there. I do want to add a little bit of water just to make sure things kind of stay a little bit moist so I can continue to work on them. is an incredibly tall piece, like completely out of my wheelhouse. So we'll just kind of see what happens. It'll be a surprise for all of us. So I'm going to try a couple of different ribs here. So again, right now I'm just really trying to work on just blending those sections together. And then I'm going to start working on the top here, which frankly I am terrified of. Alright, so I'm going to use a needle tool, and my hole in the top right now is only about this big, and I kind of want to cut it wider because there's a whole lot of clay to use down here. So all I'm doing is holding my needle tool in one spot while it spins until it cuts all the way through. Which is extremely thick, apparently. Okay, so I just cut this section out. So this was the top of my vase. Now I'm going to use a little bit of water, and I'm going to try to stretch. There's a lot of clay left at the top here, so I'm going to try to stretch this nice and tall. And I don't want to use too much water because I don't want this section of the pot to be like sopping wet and the rest of the pot to be pretty dry. But I need enough water to be able to move clay. I can feel it's a little uneven. So, which is okay because I can trim the top off in the end to make it more even. I'll show you what I mean when I get to that point. So I also want to try to reach into this jar and smooth this seam on the inside a little bit. Not that that's super important, but it also kind of gives me the chance to push this out a little bit because I know I can see that it's a little bit indented at that seam, and I'm not crazy about that. So I have a wet sponge on the inside, so I'm smoothing that seam, and I'm actually pressing out a little bit to kind of stretch it as well. My arm's not really long enough to reach in here. Whew. Alright, so it's pretty well smoothed on the inside. Again, the outside I'm not super jazzed with the shape, but we're going to continue to work on that. This is just a really wet chamois, and it lets me kind of keep some moisture just in this area without like dripping water down the entire pot, which I know I've dripped some. Not easy to reach around this thing. So I'm going to close this off a little bit. So this is called collaring. So I'm making the opening more narrow. And that also thickens up the clay more, so I can pull that section taller. So I have more clay to work with. I'm literally dripping water down to my elbows, and that drives me insane. So I pulled it a little bit taller. I can collar in again, which again thickens that up again. So I can feel the thickness in here, so I kind of know what I have to work with. Again, this is a lot taller than I'm used to working with, so it's a little bit more difficult to brace my arms. So with my one arm, I just have it kind of nicely tucked into my body to help brace it. Okay, so you're kind of getting the idea here of what I'm going for. It's got a lot of trimming and shaping to do down in this section. And I might actually have to let this dry up a little bit more before I can trim some of that away. And when I trim that, I want to make sure I'm not trimming off too much, because I don't want it to get too thin where the two pieces are connected. So kind of a tricky process. So let's see about the top here. I'm wondering if we should narrow that a little bit more. So again, I'm collaring in. To make that more narrow, which thickens it up, so I can then drip down to my elbow, pull up a taller neck. I'm sure this would be a whole ton easier if I could just throw a tall piece in one piece, but I can't, so this is the next best thing. Not that I'll stop trying to pull up taller pieces. Alright, so I'm gonna get some trimming tools and try to trim away some of that bulkiness there in that section. I know I really should have been more prepared, huh? But I'm not, so bear with me. So this is just a basic trimming tool. They come in all shapes, all sizes. I tend to have some that are my favorites, and I have some that I've probably really never even used. So these are actually called ribbon tools as well, because when you trim, your clay should come off in what looks like ribbons. So mine kind of are. I'm just trying to actually gather them up as they're coming off. So it's a little bit wet now because, you know, I ran a wet sponge over it. I'm going to use, so here's kind of a more rounded shape one. This one's a little trickier because one side is flat and the other side is serrated, so it can kind of leave like texture marks on it, but I want to make sure I'm using the flat side because I don't want to make any texture in this pot right now. Maybe later. This top section here is really wet. Obviously that's the section I was just working on and adding a whole lot of water to. So I'm trying to do this just a little bit at a time. Because again, I don't want to trim away too much near that seam, because I don't want that to get too thin. So sometimes when I trim, I start at the bottom and work my way up, and other times I'll start at the top and work my way down, and I can't even really tell you why. It's just what I do. So I feel like it's starting to come together a little bit better now. Sometimes when you're working on a pot, it's a great idea to have a mirror opposite you, because right now, like, I'm looking into my camera to kind of see how things are looking. And it gives me like a really great view of the pot. So just slowly trimming away. I really want to try to trim away some here because I don't want it to be super heavy above my seam. I want to try to lighten this up a little bit. Just looking for a pleasing shape, which I'm not quite there yet. You can see, like, right in this area, it's pretty bulky. So I'm going to try to trim some of that away. It's just like kind of shaving it down. So this is April 19th, I believe it is, in Western New York, and we had snow this morning. So the ground at my house was covered in white. And like 2 days ago, it was 80 degrees. Over 80 actually. So you never know what you're gonna get living around here. So when I trim, most of the time I try to catch my trimmings with my other hand. Mostly I do that because, again, I'm very impatient and I tend to trim things probably before they're really dry enough to trim. And when I do that, when I trim off these trimmings, they tend to just re-stick to the pot, and that annoys the crap out of me. So I'm always trying to catch them with my other hand. So this is starting to shape up here. I'm starting to like it. With any luck, I'm not getting too thin in any sections. Both of these sections probably could have been a little bit thicker, but they weren't, so, you know, I deal with what I got. Yeah, that's taken on a nicer shape. And once I get like this shape all done, I can still go back to the top and reshape that if I want to. I think this video's gonna end up to be a lot longer than I was thinking. So sorry about that, but hope you're enjoying it. So I've been doing pottery for probably, I don't know, 15, 16-ish years. And I still watch other people's YouTubes all the time because I'm constantly learning. So I don't know if I should talk while I'm working. I am entirely self-taught. So I truly just learn by doing. So I would really watch other potters, primarily on YouTube, and I would try their techniques. And if that didn't work for me, I'd watch somebody else and try their techniques. And then eventually you just kind of get comfortable and you learn your own techniques. And then it just grows from there. The thing with pottery is it's really about knowing the basics, and then it's all practice after that. And you have to have some catastrophes in there, which, trust me, I have had plenty of catastrophes. And I try not to let them get me too frustrated. So when I first started doing pottery, I was extremely frustrated. And I may or may not have thrown a few balls of clay. But, you know, you gotta get back to it, kind of like falling off a horse, you gotta get back on. And you just try again. So you can see here, this bottom section, it's pretty wet. So you can see that the trimmings that I trimmed off just kind of restuck to the pot. Oops, and now I dropped them all in the water. Okay, so it's getting there. Still feel like it's kind of heavy up in here, so I'm still going to trim some away there. And again, I'm not trying to trim away a lot at one time. Like my ribbons or trimmings that come off are really like, if I had to guess, they're like 1 millimeter thick. So I'm not like gouging into the clay to try to remove a lot at one time. I can feel a little lump in there. I don't know if you can see it. No, maybe not. So still some heaviness. I'm not liking how it's blending. Like, I feel like I can still see where one section ends and the other starts. And that's what I want to get rid of. I made a couple of these two-piece vases the other day when it was 80 degrees out. So I used that beautiful sunny weather to set my pieces outside and help them dry up. So I was able to make those all in one day too. Because again, I'm not very patient. So I think it's super important to add those coils like I did to the section where it's joined, because that will also thicken it up there, so I don't have to worry so much about trimming away. Alright, that's getting there. So I don't spin real fast when I'm trimming. I'm not sure if the speed really matters. But if you go super slow, then every time you move your tool, you're going to leave like this ridge in your clay. Or if you go a little bit faster, you can move your tool and it doesn't leave quite as many ridges. I don't want to go super fast. Number one, I don't want the centrifugal force of the wheel kind of throwing things off. Alright, starting to like it. So still a little bit in here. So one of the rules of thumb when you're trimming, and actually when you're doing anything on your pot, you can move your hands or your tool on the clay in relation to, speed-wise, in relation to how fast your clay is spinning. So while I'm spinning slower, I'm going to move my tool a little bit slower. And you should have your pot make at least one full rotation before you move your tool. So that way it'll trim it more evenly. So if I moved up my pot too quickly while it's spinning slowly, I would end up with some unevenness. Alright, we're really kind of getting there. I still feel there's a little bit of bulkiness here. Go back to my flexible rubber rib. Sometimes you can actually kind of push your shape into what you want versus trimming clay away all the time. It just depends on if your piece is still soft enough to do that. I'm not real concerned about the very, very bottom of the vase right now. That's got a lot of moisture left in it, so I can trim away a lot of that later on. I'm mostly concerned about the general shape of the vase. So it's getting there. So I have, I think I'm okay with the size of the neck of it, but I do think I'm going to kind of flare out the top a little bit. Actually, you know what? We're just going to do that with, instead of adding more water, but that's still pretty wet at the top, I'm going to shape it with my flexible rubber rib so it's nicely curved, and I can actually kind of shape the neck of my pot into that same curve. And this helps to dry out the clay as well. So you can see I kind of rolled out the top of the neck. it ends up, like right now it's pretty even. If your rim ends up being wonky, you can use a needle tool while it's spinning and just kind of cut off the very, very top of it to make it flat again. So how are we feeling about this here? This is probably the rib that I use the most. I like it because it's so flexible and I can kind of get the angles and shape that I want. I also have this wooden rib, so obviously there's no flexibility or give to that. I don't use this one nearly as much. If I want a little bit more sturdy of a base to push against, because really when you're using a rib, like I have my rib tool on the outside of the pot, my hand on the inside, and my inside hand is kind of pushing the clay into the rib. And I have customers now, so.
Oh, look at this.